Hello, everybody. We still have a few people logging in, so we're going to give everyone some time to get settled, and then we'll get underway. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, we can start. Hello again. We have around 200 guests from over 35 countries, hopefully joining us today for our in-session talk, What is Intelligent Mobility? Before introducing you to our esteemed guests, allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar, as you've probably seen, is being recorded. We will be able to share a link to the recording after the event at some point. This week, we also invite you to ask questions by using your Q&A button. Please use the chat if you have any technical difficulties regarding the webinar. We aim to have a very interactive talk today, and we'll introduce polls during the session, and you will be able to submit your answers online. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jiayu, Martin, and Rikesh. I'm going to hand you over to Jiayu, who is going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, everyone, to this in-session talk about intelligent mobility. I'm amazed, like Joe said, that we see we have participants from every continent joining us today. My name is Jiayu Wu. I'm the reader in Intelligent Mobility Design at the RCA. The Intelligent Mobility Design Center, the IMDC, where I'm based, leads research at the intersection of people, mobility, and technology within a complex and changing urban and global environment. We are a collection of academics, researchers, and students exploring the boundaries of this exciting new field. I'm very pleased to be joined today by two amazing intelligent mobility practitioners. Rikesh Shah joins us from Transport for London's Innovation Hub, where we lead open innovation focusing on public-private sector collaboration to create new value. His groundbreaking projects with startups, academia, and corporates include innovative data-connected solutions, tools encouraging walking in London, air quality, and road safety. Thank you, Rikesh, for joining us. Martin Uhlarik is head of global design at Tata Motors. Martin is an experienced automobile designer with a keen understanding of international trends and design. With more than 25 years experience at leading automobile companies, including Tata, Nissan, SAIC, Skoda, and others. He leads teams in the 3 Tata Motors Design Center in India. Thank you both very much for participating today. So what is intelligent mobility? At the IMDC, we say the future of intelligent mobility isn't just about design or about technology. It is about technology, design, people, and culture combined. The government's industrial strategy defines it as the way people, goods, and services move. The Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders say intelligent mobility can refer to in-vehicle intelligence, vehicle-to-vehicle intelligence, and vehicle-to-infrastructure intelligence. An intelligent transport system should put the traveler at the heart of a coordinated transport network to ensure the most efficient end-to-end travel experience. Generally, intelligent mobility addresses increasing mobility freedom, providing a variety of ways to approach mobility, optimizing cost and service balance. How do you define intelligent mobility, Rikesh?
Thank you, Jiayu, and lovely to be on the panel here with yourself and Martin. So I think, for me, it starts with what's the problem that we're trying to solve and what outcomes do we want, rather than starting with a tech lens. And, in the case of my city, it's about doing things better, cheaper, and quicker. And as a result, it's really important we don't become tech-led. And it's really about understanding user needs, about city needs, about other stakeholders' key needs. It's also about understanding what the advances in technology are. And it's also about understanding the adoption. And it's not a big reveal, you don't suddenly become intelligent. We're saying 3 years time we're intelligent. And there are lots of words that have been used in our industry which sometimes actually causes confusion, like intelligent mobility or like smart cities, etc. And I think there is a definition piece, but I think ultimately for me, it's about creating new value for different stakeholders. And it's when we look back and understand what benefits have been realized, that's where the role of new technology may have added value or may not have added value. I think we cannot start with the technology. And that's a mistake that's made time again and again. And whether that's the technology on infrastructure or whether it's the technology on the vehicle, it's much more about the outcomes that we want to achieve.
Great answer. Better, cheaper, quicker. These are such simple and powerful words to define intelligent mobility. How do you define intelligent mobility, Martin?
Yeah, also thank you for letting me join the panel in this discussion. I mean, our design brief, we're responsible for obviously creating automotive products, vehicles, but we're also in the business and defining commercial vehicles and also transport vehicles. So we have a large remit in terms of the type of products that we're designing. And when we're moving people, products, services, ultimately it's how do we move them from A to B intelligently. So we have a very human-centric sort of position in terms of how we design products. It has to be safe, it has to be seamless, it has to integrate into society in a beneficial way. Ultimately, it's a mobility service that we're offering, whether it's goods or services or passengers. And moving people from A to B, the fundamental focus has to be about improving the quality of life. So whether it's the experience of the journey or it's how that service is offered in the larger scheme of things, that has to be the ultimate responsibility of our designers.
Great answer. Thank you, Martin. Especially you talking about people, products, services, and we should use human-centered design approaches. I'll ask all of you online today, what do you think of when you hear the term intelligent mobility? Let us know using the poll Jill is going to put online. Okay, so Rikesh, you talked about London's city transport transformation at last year's human-centered design for intelligent mobility short course. How do you take into consideration old and new, or when talking about transport, particularly when using particularly for the customers using intelligent mobility concepts and improve customer experience and journey satisfaction?
Yeah, it's a good question. And what London isn't as a city is a complete greenfield site. So you can't just plug and play and bring something new in and hope it works or it will work. What you have in London is a city that's thousands of years old. And the transport system itself, the tube, we just celebrated 160th anniversary for the metro service. So as a result, we have a lot of legacy. We have legacy in terms of the infrastructure, the types of roads, and bringing it to the modern day, legacy in terms of the systems. So as a result, that context has to be acknowledged. As a city, we move over 31 million people around every day across London. And we have set a strategic goal, which is by 2041, we want 80% of trips in London to be made by walking, cycling, and public transport. And we're an organization that's adamant on customer satisfaction. And I use the word customer. I don't say user, I don't say passenger. And our job is to make sure that people feel confident that they can move around the city, safely, securely, reliably, to do what they need to do. And that means that we have to measure customer satisfaction. So we measure customer satisfaction levels on the bus network, on the road network, on the tube network, and any other mode of transport that we cover. What we're looking to do within that is look at some of the pain points and see how we can improve and continuously iterate and improve as a city and operationally react when we need to. And that means that when new ideas come in, we can't just say no to everything really quickly, nor should we say yes really quickly. And the reason why I say that is if we say yes really quickly, you could end up bringing something into the city that may sound good on paper, but in the long run create an adverse impact. And similarly, if you say no very quickly, you may end up missing out on some benefit that could have been realized for your city. So for me, it's very much about starting with the problem statements that we have for our city, and there could be strategic ones, there could be tactical ones. Really scouting the market, working with the likes of Tata Motors and others to say, what innovation solutions do you have that can make our city better? And then experiment. Experiment and iterate and create the evidence base to say, is this right for our city? And then make long-term decisions, whether it's legislation, whether it's policy, or whether it's ultimately procuring something. So, but you do not do anything without having the customer at the heart of that decision-making process.
Great. It sounds like experiment, iteration is very important. And also you want to open to get all kinds of new ideas from the public, from the users, and from all stakeholders. So this is a question for you, Martin. In your career in the automobile industry, how has the transformation from traditional vehicle design to addressing all kinds of human transport needs and technology challenges for the future of mobility, such as electric, autonomous, and connected vehicles happened?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, there's a big generational shift. When I was a student, we were told to design the product, whereas now there's definitely the focus on designing the experience. That's a fundamental shift in terms of the approach the designer has. Actually, I have 2 degrees. One is in transportation, classic vehicle design, and that was always seen as more of a styling exercise, which is very emotive and very sort of reactionary. But I also have an industrial design degree, and I find myself, the older I get and the longer I get in my career, that I'm using the industrial design sort of DNA, because the fundamental role of a designer is to solve problems. And you have to look at it from a very, objective point of view in terms of understanding what the customer wants, what's the objective of the product, and what's the role of that product in the larger scheme of things. So when I said, we design the experience now, you have to think of obviously the product itself, it has to be functional, it has to be safe, it has to be beautiful and attractive and make the experience a pleasant one. But you have to think about the product also in the context of what happens, how do you engage in that product before you use it? What happens to the product after you finish using it? And how does it fit into the whole ecosystem? So even when we design a car, you have a number of aspects. You have interior design, exterior design. On the interior design, you have ergonomics, you have, interface, you have comfort, safety, all of those things. So designing the vehicle and designing the vehicle and the product in the ecosystem is a very holistic exercise. You have to really look at it from the big picture first, and then break it down into the number of sort of factors. But there has been a fundamental shift. And as you said at the end of the question, there's 4 major challenges happening in the industry. One is, of course, the shift from fossil fuels to electric powertrain. That has a massive effect. Then you have connectivity. Eventually, you'll have autonomy. And then you also have the ownership model, which is changing. And that's just in the sort of personal vehicle area. Obviously, that will have effects, whether it's on commercial vehicle and also on transport systems in general. So all those new technologies are always an enabler to actually almost jumpstart design into a next generation of products and solutions as well.
Great. Martin, it's very nice you mentioned all of these technologies. So my next question is about intelligent. I think it's something to do with technologies. When we talk about intelligent, is it always something to do with digital technologies, information optimization and automation? Or is it more than that? So this question is for Rikesh. You were influential in opening the open data APIs for TFL. Was that sufficient for intelligent systems to emerge? What else was needed?
Yeah, it's a good question, and just to give the audience some context on this, we released our data about transport services in London, so where your bus is, where your tube is, levels of congestion on the road network. And the value that we created as a result of it is every pound that we spend, we get 130 back. So the return on investment was really strong. And that is because people that now know where their bus is, so they don't have to wait at the bus stop, so that you're not losing productivity in terms of time. And when we first started this, there was an element of luck and there was design too. So there was a bit of both. And sometimes I think you need both of that because you need the planets to align for a product to successfully scale. And when we first started, the notion of open data was, how can we be more transparent about the information about our services? How can we let the market create a series of products and be more innovative? Because there are 17,000 developers that are accessing our data, so they were creating lots of products. Also, how can you create some niche products? Because TfL can't do everything. And it's also about letting the customer engage on their transport information through their channel of choice. And the technology element here is the unified API. So that is all the data coming together from different forms of transport, 10,000 buses, hundreds of tube carriages, hundreds of documents like railways, car information, and you're bringing all of that together through technology. But actually, for it to succeed by itself, it wouldn't have been enough. We needed to curate and work with the developers to say, what are the problems that we have in our city that we need to solve? What are some of the strategic challenges? How do we design the data in the format that's accessible for the developers, the creatives that can use the data to create new products? How do we put those developers in next to some of our customers and subject matter experts, so you're continuously iterating? And ultimately, how do you get the adoption from end users to use these products? So suddenly you've got a customer lens, you've got a stakeholder lens, you've got a technology lens, and you've also got the problem and the designing lens. And you start putting all of that together, and that's how you start to see the value. So I think technology, of course, plays a key role, because without having cloud, without having connectivity, without having a series of IoTs, sensors in different assets, it wouldn't have been possible. So that's of course relevant, but it's much more than that. It's the whole package.
Yes, I noticed that you also use design thinking in your work process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's quite rare actually that public sector bodies have a design thinking function. So what we have is, when in the innovation team, we look at about up to 100 problem statements per year, and it could be big or small. And we don't, sometimes what's happened in the past when it comes to innovation is someone locally, whether it's a business area or whether it's a tech person, tries to invent a solution. And what we're starting with now is, let's start defining the problem in the right context. And based on us designing the right problem, we have a series of design thinking experts. So what they do is they bring a lot of insight in, they bring a lot of context in, they bring different stakeholders in. And suddenly the problem that we're trying to get to is the right problem. Because occasionally someone thinks that's the problem, and then you invest in it, and then a few years later you realize that we started with the wrong problem. So it's really important for us to start with that right problem. So we have a series of design thinking experts who now across the organization are working with key stakeholders to say, let's just reframe the question here if we need to, and make sure we're going out with the right question before we do anything.
Great. Martin, I have a question for you. I noticed that the Tata NVR concept is intended to heavily use voice commands. Is that sufficient for it to be counted as intelligent? What other trends are emerging, and how do you see them impacting the wider industry?
Yeah, so what we've been doing is one of the areas where we really look at is we do a lot of analysis of not just design trends, but also social trends in terms of how people are adopting to new technologies. And we've noticed that there's, if you just look at consumer electronics and especially phones, we've gone from buttons to touch screens, and now there seems to be a shift to voice command. And that's obviously a generational shift, but it's also a technology that could potentially help unlock certain challenges. Obviously, if we're talking about a vehicle, your focus should be on safety, keeping your eyes on the road. The less interface or distractions you have, the better. So it could be a technology, for instance, that we see is beneficial in terms of making things more seamless, and at the same time, obviously, a safer journey. So yes, we're very much invested in that as a technology, and we see that as one of those disruptor areas where, again, new technology then benefits the design, which benefits obviously the product experience.
Great. So we talked about intelligent, and the topic today is intelligent mobility. So I want to move to mobility now. When we talk about mobility, what do you think it should or shouldn't include? Any vehicle, transport, service examples you would like to talk about? Martin?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about mobility, as I said earlier, I mean, we're designing products that are, personal vehicles, but we're also designing commercial vehicles, which is trucks, and also then vehicles like buses for cities, municipalities, and states. So mobility is a very broad term, but ultimately it's about moving goods and services and people from A to B. And so ultimately, as an industrial designer, I would say the role is how to make that as integrated into society, as less obtrusive, but at the same time enjoyable. Whether it's as a personal vehicle, you have to get from A to B, you have to go to work, to school, from city to city, or from location to location. It doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes, 1 hour, or 5 hours. You want to make the journey as enjoyable as possible, that it's a positive experience, and it doesn't become to the detriment to the user, but also to society at large. And when we're talking about goods and services, obviously, anybody who has to deliver, a package or some sort of cargo has to do it in a safe manner, and again, as seamlessly as possible and professionally. Most of the people who are using our vehicles, are companies, and they have to offer a reliable service and a professional service. And at the same time, that service is reflected, those values have to be reflected in the bigger picture in terms of, like I said, the landscape of the society and so forth. So it's all about, making that as positive as possible, and obviously from a personal point of view, as enjoyable as possible.
Enjoyable for the people who either they are streams or the providers. Rikesh, you have something to talk.
Yeah, Jay, if I can, because I agree with what Martin said there, and just giving a sort of building on that point is, mobility helps people live life. People need to move around, so it's about making sure that mobility is supporting social inclusion and not turning into a social exclusion issue. Because transport has to be for all. You need to get to the hospital, you need to go to the doctors, you need to go to work or to the shops. So it's really important that transport is accessible, it's equitable. And the other thing that I think about is the role that transport plays, or the role that mobility plays. It can be anything. It can be anything from walking to driving a car, to riding a bike, to being on public transport, and anything else. And we've got to make sure, particularly in cities now, in the urban environment, that we create healthier cities. We've got to deal with some of the issues around pollution, because transport is a major contributor. We need to issue with people being more active. In cities, we've got issues around obesity, type 2 diabetes. Sadly, we have tragedies around road collisions and deaths, and we have to get to vision zero. But also, it's also the role that transport plays around economic hubs, jobs creation, creating wealth in cities and urban environments and beyond is important. So the role of mobility, of course moves people from A to B, but it's also bigger than that. And we need to make sure that we reflect on the whole environment.
Just on that, Rikesh, TfL developed Legible London, as I know, a system of map-based street signs designed to make London much easier to walk around. So it means that for short journeys, you can swap your usual route for a healthier and quicker walk instead. Do you think that we need to have a vehicle to be in an intelligent mobility ecosystem?
I don't think so. I think actually what you just mentioned was, that if you offer the person a healthier option that doesn't actually include mobility, that should be on the table, because ultimately it's all about, the individual choice. And at the same time, if it's for the better of the user or the overall, like I said, society as large, as you said, Rikesh, then it should be available. It should be discouraged at all.
So we should allow all kinds of options for people to transport from A to B, or goods or products transport from A to B, right? So, okay, Joe has been reminding me that we got a very fantastic results from the audience. Let's have a look. What is the result from the question, the poll? What do you think is intelligent mobility? I see that majority people answer putting human experience at the center of transport design making. 62% people answer that, with 44% people saying innovating the way people, goods, and services move, and 38% people saying new digital technologies and information services that makes mobility more convenient and easier to use. Great, thank you very much for participating. Let's move on. Next, I'd like to turn to design methods, since we are an art and design university. What can design as innovation approaches do to assist intelligent mobility innovation? Rikesh, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, design is, bring it very local to London. Design's in our fabric. We think about the transport services and the role design and heritage plays in our city. Is we're very careful that if you bring something in, this asset could be around for a long time. And as a result, you need to really think about how does this asset fit into the fabric of our city, and also how will it be used in the future. So, but one thing that I would say, and going back to the previous poll, is technology is advancing at such a fast rate. So assets that maybe I would have bought in the 1940s or 1950s, the likelihood is those assets may not have changed as much. Whereas assets that we're buying now, and I'll think about lampposts or bus shelters, or even the types of buses that we have on our network, they could change very quickly in the next 5 years. So suddenly we could invest massive amounts of capital investment into large assets, and then suddenly find it's not quite right in a few years' time. So the role of design here is critical, where not only do we want to build things that are fit for purpose and really good right now, we're also thinking about what does it look like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 15 years' time. So suddenly when we start thinking about the design aspect, we're trying to future-proof some of our procurement processes, some of the assets and the infrastructure that we're building. And I think we need to be much more modular in our thinking. So as a result, plug and play as the environment changes. And I think that design thinking up front is critical, because otherwise you could end up procuring something or building something on day one, and suddenly on day 350, 370, you say, well, have we done the right thing? So how do we create more flexibility in that design process is important, which is hard. If you think about some of the assets that we're responsible for, the big roads, the tunnels, and the infrastructure that runs within it, it can be difficult. But I think as we think about connectivity, as we think about advances in other forms of technology, how can we be more iterative rather than just building and doing a big reveal?
So design is a very good tool or assistant for us to foreseeing the future in a right way. Martin, what do you think?
No, I think actually the term you said, Rikesh, which is future proofing, is actually the key.
Hello, Martin.
Can you hear me? Yeah, so I was saying the future proofing is actually the key role in terms of when you're designing. You really have to think in the long term. I don't want to say you want to make it timeless, because different challenges come with different times and different periods and obviously regions. But at the same time, you do have to think long term. Technology is an enabler, but technology evolves, and it's a never-ending evolution. So our role has to be to look at it, from a sort of a longer viewpoint. And a lot of it is, observing technology trends, but also observing social trends, and like I said earlier, generational trends. And being a designer is being a social observer, and finding the right solutions that are fit for purpose for whatever the task is at hand. So you definitely have to have that sort of weather vane, with an idea of what's coming down the road and what challenges. You have to be very preemptive when you're designing, whether it's a product or a service, it doesn't matter.
Do you both think design innovation lead to new process within just a small niches, or are they having impact across the whole industry worldwide?
In terms of new processes, I mean, of course, the design process has changed over at least, my career. We've gone from an analog design process to a digital design process that has allowed us to speed up the process and make it much more efficient and quicker, faster. But it also allows you to have more inputs. And I think, like anything, when you have a conversation, that's what designing or finding solutions is. It's a conversation. The more inputs you have, the more mature your conclusion will be. It's like doing a thesis. The more research you do, the more maybe refined your final argument is. So digital process, and like I said, things like, when I started being a designer, the internet was just at its infancy. And if I see the information that we can now process, it makes our like I said, our conclusions much more quicker, and it's a much more open source sort of discussion. So for sure, the processes have improved, and that's all part of like just the evolution of technology, and that will also help us, enable, better solutions.
Great, thank you. Rikesh, do you have any?
Yeah. Would you mind repeating the question, please? Sorry, I just slightly lost the question. Sorry.
Do you both think the design approach lead to new processes within just small niches, or are they having impact across the whole industry worldwide?
Yeah, and I'll sort of answer this from a slightly different perspective, which is, we think about the hundreds of cities, the thousands of cities we have across the world. And we're approaching some of our problems separately.
Mm-hmm.
London will do it different to New Delhi, who will do it slightly different to New York, who will do it different to other cities. And I think at a principle level, at a strategic level, many of our problems are quite similar. In the case of mobility, you've got shared space, but you've got lots of demand for that shared space. How do you best use it? The role of mass transit versus private transit, the increase in freight movements across our cities, challenges around equality, etc., etc. So we're very similar problems. But what is also important to say is contextually, all the places are different. Some might be subtly different, some might be significantly different. So whilst we might have a common approach to design, actually, if it's not done in the right context, you can't just plug and play the solutions that Delhi's come up with and put them in London, or put London solutions into New York. You've got to contextualize it, and that requires a lot of work, as Martin said, a lot of understanding, a lot of data, bringing in different perspectives, bringing in different stakeholders, and then I think you can get it right for your city. And also, once you do launch it in your city, it doesn't have to be the fixed solution. You'll have to be ready to pivot and iterate. So I think the answer is yes, have the same principles, but contextually different.
Yes. Here, actually, I have a good question from the audience. I see a question. I think this guest is from France. I don't know if you can answer that question. How have been the roles involving for French design graduates in the mobility industry for both of you?
Martin, you might be better qualified than me to answer this.
Yeah, I mean, we have there's a number of very good schools that are producing very interesting and qualified and talented graduates. To be honest, in our design studio, we have 3 studios, and in our studios we have actually fairly large contingent of French designers who are bringing a very unique perspective, not only from an aesthetic point of view, but also just from a problem solving. And as we said, I think solving a problem has to be very barrier free. It has to be, open to all perspectives. So, we have a very multicultural design team. We have 19 nationalities in our studios. And the more perspectives we have, the better. We also have a kind of, a semi-formal alliance with one of the schools, both in India and in which is actually an offshoot of a school in France. So like I said, definitely from that vantage point, there's a lot of valuable inputs coming in, and like I said, a lot of valuable graduates. But at the same time, like I said, we're very open to any perspective, and it has to be really equal in terms of you have to have a very open mind to find the right solutions. So that goes without saying in our business.
Great. Rikesh, do you have anything to add on?
Yeah, and just I think what Martin said is really important around diversity of thought. And we're an industry here, mobility, that traditionally, look, I'll say it's been very male dominated. And we need different perspectives in our industry, particularly at senior level. So I would say we need to encourage, because everyone is affected by mobility. So we need to make sure that we have a diverse representation, a diversity of thought from different countries and different genders and so on and so forth, to make sure that we really are doing the best we can in terms of bringing the best products out. And I think secondly, in London now, what we're starting to think about more and more is how do we bring academic institutes to solve our problems? So we don't want to just work with our tier 1 partners who are fantastic, but we want to work with startups, we want to work with academic institutes, including design schools, and give us those different perspectives at that early stage so we can really make a difference in terms of achieving some of our strategic goals.
Great, thank you. And at this point, I'd like to put another poll to the audience. What do you think about the role of design in mobility-related businesses or R&D? Please let us know via the poll that Joe put up for you now. Okay, let's go on. Actually, I was thinking about this, cultural thing. I see a question in the Q&A box. It's very interesting. I'd like to put up for both of you. This question says, as I said, I think intelligent mobility is when the solutions are well integrated. I would love to hear how we tackle the challenges of integration best, both technical integration, but also integration of a new solution in an exciting city or an exciting ecosystem. Who wants to go first?
Should I go, Martin?
Please.
Go ahead, Rikesh.
Thank you. So I think this is where cities in particular need to change. And it comes back to my earlier point, which is the rate that technology is changing means that we need to be engaging with market innovators much more early than we have done in the past. And let me give you an example. When I was a kid, and that was a long time ago now, so let's say 25 years ago, I had 5 forms of transport that I had access to. My parents may give me a lift in their car if I was a good boy that day, or I may use public transport. And if I use public transport, in those days I pay for it, whereas in London now it's free for anyone in full-time education. So I may use the metro or the bus, or I may use a minicab service, a private hire vehicle. I don't think I ever held a taxi, or I may have my BMX bike, which I'll be riding around. So they were my 5 main choices of transport. Let's just think about transport right now, and I'll pick one example, cycling. You may own a bike. If you do own that bike, it could be a folding bike, it could be an electric bike. But you may decide not to own a bike, so you may be in a bike club, or you may end up hiring an e-scooter, or you may end up using another hired e-service, another e-bike, or you may end up being a bike club, or you may use a Santander scheme in London, which is a shared service. So suddenly, just in cycling, we've just created 8 or 9 forms of transport, and do the same for ride hailing, and do the same for other forms of ticketing products. All of that's changed significantly. So my point here is that we have to adapt and understand what is going on in the marketplace. And then how do we integrate the new things into an existing system? Because mass transit still carries most people around our cities, you know, whether it's the metro service or the bus network. So how do you integrate these new forms of services, new modes of transport, or other forms of offering into the existing infrastructure, and making sure that you're always focused on that strategic goal, which in our case is customer satisfaction, and hitting that 80% target of transport being used, the trips being made by walking, cycling, and public transit. So how do you bring all of that together, and you do that in a gradual manner?
Great, thank you. What do you think, Martin? Regarding...
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you have to kind of, you know, table as many options as possible, and it goes both ways. You know, the planners or the creative people or the people who are responsible for creating the solutions should listen to what the customers would like to see. And of course, at the same time, you know, the planners, you know, also have to have the ability to think outside the box. Many times, you know, people only see what's in front of them. They can't think laterally or imagine, you know, solutions that don't exist right now. And just because they don't exist, they shouldn't be discounted. I mean, you mentioned the bicycle or, you know, cycling aspect. I mean, when I moved to London 20 years ago, you know, cycling in London was a very dangerous proposition. And if you had said at the time, you know, changing the infrastructure, changing the way streets are designed, speed limit, offering a number of options, you know, in terms of cycling options, whether it's your own or it's something you subscribe to or whatnot. I mean, people would have thought that was so revolutionary from an infrastructure point of view that the price tag would be undoable. And here we are 20 years later, and actually London has basically made that transition. So like I said, sometimes the solution might seem daunting or really, I don't want to say kind of crazy, but at the same time, every idea should be considered if it actually solves the problem. And then you have to find the roadmap of how to actually implement it. It might be a number of years in terms of phasing it in. You know, the investment has to be considered, you know, the changes to society it makes in terms of the landscape of how people use it and all that. That's a very good example of how you can create, you know, and as we were saying earlier, you know, the solution might not be a 2-year solution, a 5-year solution. It might be a generational solution. It might be a 40-year solution. But if you start down that road and you stick to it in terms of a strategy, then you actually might be able to implement it. So like I said, you have to be very open-minded to any idea for that matter.
So just to extend the technology integration topic, since the information communications technologies are catalyzing new ideas for mobility solutions, such as navigation services, traffic monitoring, and vehicle interfaces, what new business opportunities do you foresee? Martin, what is your experience?
Well, if I look at, you know, digital communication technologies, I mean, obviously, you know, without being too simplistic, you know, the word app, you know, has changed the way people interface with any service. So, you know, the ease of how you can engage the service, you can see your timetable, you can see, you know, how to get from A to B, whether you're driving a vehicle or using, you know, a transport system. That's a perfect example of how technology has made the user experience much more easier. And and ultimately, you know, if it solves the problem, then it is of value. And that's been, one aspect. You can see communication technology. Now, whether you want to monetize that, or you can make that becomes, a business stream, that's also potentially a benefit, or something that you can benefit from. And we've seen that in a number of industries.
Thank you. Rikesh, have these opportunities, such as the technology changes, changed the way you work or your organization's strategies?
Yes, good question. And could I just jump on the previous question as well, just a little bit, just to give it a bit of context? Because I think with ICT, and this is a really relevant example. So the role of connected autonomous vehicle has been spoken about a lot. And 10 years ago, people said that London will be transformed and other cities will be transformed, and we still haven't seen that change. But that was a long-term bet that people are placing, and who knows what will happen in the future. But there's an aspect of it that is making a difference right now. So the connected car, now Martin will know this much better than I, but I understand a connected car, has about 100 sensors or so, but I'm not sure exactly. But we've started to now pull data from OEMs to tell us about road risk in London. So where cars might be suddenly disproportionately accelerating, maybe skidding, swerving. So we're now starting to build a picture of not just where maybe the tragedies have taken place, sadly, but also where maybe there's abnormal behavior and we need to investigate further. So suddenly that concept of the connected autonomous vehicle, we've just taken that connected bit out and pivoted it for another use case. And I think that's really important, that we continuously experiment rather than just thinking about the North Star all the time. So I think that's one point. And then in terms of connectivity, we did partner with Waze, which is a sat-nav application. And what we did with Waze, for those of you that know London, there's a tunnel called the Blackwall Tunnel that connects South and North London, or North and South London. And sometimes the reason why people break down in that tunnel is they run out of fuel. So what we did with Waze is, based on geo-targeting, they put some notifications up to say there's a big tailback in the tunnel. If you do need to refuel, there's a garage 400 yards on your left. What we saw is some people were redirecting their car to the garage. So as a result, even if 10% of those vehicles may have broken down in a tunnel, that would have just saved us lots of disbenefit potentially taking place. So that's an example of how we're using ICT in terms of connected cars and connected people to our advantage to keep the city functioning. So sorry, so that was a bit of a long-winded answer on that one, but the two examples. In terms of culture, culture change is critical, and we're on a journey within our organization where how can we protect people from failure being a bad word? Because we worry about getting things wrong, and as a result, we penalize people. But we need to create a culture where people have the right controls in place, the right safeguards in place, where they can experiment and try things. And as a result, you reward people sometimes for getting things wrong. But if they get it wrong, let's learn from it quickly, and let's move on to the next thing, rather than doing the same mistakes again and again. So I think there's a big cultural shift in our industry that's needed, because it's so engineering centric. And as a result, we want to get everything 100% right, that we worry about getting things wrong. And I think we really need to change that, because the challenges that we have in the urban environment are significant, and we have to experiment and try things and allow for failure. So that requires a significant culture change.
Great, thank you. I think it's a time we look at our second poll result. I can say that, what do you think about the role of design in mobility-related businesses and R&D? 65% people thinking design considers all aspects of users' needs. 60% people thinking design invents new solutions which will eventually enhance technologies and the way people look at problems and difficulties. It sounds like design innovation is quite a critical approach that people can use in intelligent mobility solutions or research. Okay, I think I want to open the floor to the questions from audience. I see some really interesting questions. This question is from Julian What about the sustainability of the new tech? EV produce less air pollution, but a lot of resources needed with all the consequences it has with extraction, etc. Then what about inclusivity? People with handicap, old people, etc. in the future of mobility? Martin, would you like to answer?
Okay, so
question?
there's kind of two questions there, or two sort of challenges. One is the move to electrification. Obviously it reduces air quality, but it poses other aspects of where does the electricity come from, how are you getting the commodities, and how is it being sourced, and so forth. So that is, you have to be responsible. I mean, now we've seen a lot of legislation globally, and also from a state point of view, in terms of everybody has to be responsible. So there's a value system. Ultimately, people who are going to purchase a vehicle, if I take that as an example, they will want to know where the material has been sourced, how has this product been manufactured, is it meeting a net zero sort of balance sheet. And if it doesn't, then even if the product itself solves the immediate problem, it's part of a greater problem itself. So manufacturers have to own the problem from a big point of view. Obviously, I work for a company where at the moment it's a large multinational company which has a number of companies and divisions which are involved in energy and materials and chemical and so forth. So it can leverage those other businesses and create an ecosystem that creates a sort of net zero solution. And then what was, just remind me the second aspect, the second side of the
second aspect is about inclusivity, like the solutions for people, disabled, old people.
Well, that goes back to what we said earlier in terms of the more variety of inputs you have, the richer your answer is going to be, and it goes both ways. You have to consider all aspects of society, whether it's age, or whether it's gender, or whether it's special needs and so forth. So it's very difficult to find an answer to all questions. You don't want to create something that's generic and sort of averaged out to the point where it doesn't actually answer all questions. So but you do have to consider that for sure. You cannot discriminate in any aspect, and so a good solution has to consider all customer needs.
Just based on that, there is a debate about should we produce something like one size fits all solution, or should we produce customized solution?
Well, it depends on the system. I think you have to offer a menu of options to people, and they pick the one that's fit for purpose. If you look like getting across London as an example, you have a menu of options on the table. As long as all of them are not disruptive, then all of them are viable. And it's which one. You have to give people the individual freedom of choice, but all the options that are on the table have to be, have to have merit. That goes without saying. So I don't think you can create a fit for purpose. There's no one car that will cater to all customers, I'll tell you that. And it's the same thing with any mobility solution as well.
Thank you. Rikesh, would you like to add more on that question?
Yeah, I fully agree with Martin about sustainability. It's more than just what's coming out of the tailpipe. It's all the way from sourcing to the decommissioning. So we need to think about the total cost and the environmental cost. And something we're conscious of is if you stop the emissions from the tailpipe, what impact does it have as you have heavier vehicles? And then when you're braking suddenly in terms of the tire pollutants, and does that create a worse environment? So we've been working with some innovators now to find new compounds which potentially could help us reduce the emissions from tires. So we are thinking about this quite holistically. Of course, you'd expect me to say as a city official that ideally we want people to use sustainable forms of transport, like public transport or walking, cycling. And if they do have to use the private vehicle, then make sure it's as efficient as possible in terms of sustainability. So that's something that's close to our heart. And I think the second point on accessibility is, I'll play a statistic back to you. Recently, a while ago now, we ran a survey and we asked Londoners, do you have an accessibility need? And 14% of Londoners said they had an accessibility need. So not everyone would be in a wheelchair. It could be, someone going to the airport with luggage, or it could be someone with a pushchair, and so forth. So the point here is that in London, we do have an aging population. So the needs for accessibility are even actually more focused. So when we start designing things now, let's design a system for all right up front. So that means that it supports everyone, irrespective of what their needs are, because a lift is useful for me depending on what I'm doing at a given time.
Thank you. I see another question, very interesting. This is about, since we talk about information technologies, this question is to do with what opportunities are there to help ensure and protect privacy and anonymity. Enabling mobility also means increasing surveillance. That's very good question, because when we talk about the advanced technologies, people will think about, is my data shared with some companies? Is that safe? Who wants to answer that question?
Sure. I think it's a brilliant question. And as an innovator here, I've got to think about the unintended consequences. And I think of my responsibility that if we brought something in a few years' time, someone might say, who was that idiot that brought that in? So, and data is critical here, right? And the role of data. So what this comes back to, this experimentation thing, is we need to be transparent around any experiments we're running, what data we're collecting, making sure end users and other key stakeholder groups are challenging us really hard. So as a result, we get all that insight and think about potential unintended consequences. Because I might get excited on a particular program and think about the outcomes and the technology and the solutions it's creating, but we have to respect people's privacy. It's the law, it's a reputational risk, and we've got to run the right experiments and make sure we're being challenged as hard as possible before we even think about moving further in the program.
Great, thank you. I think we have 2 minutes before we need to close this. I want to ask a final question. This is a question to Martin. How do you perceive multimodal interaction in the vehicles?
What do they mean by that, multimodal interaction?
Yeah, it's a little bit, it needs a little bit more explanation. What I'm thinking is maybe it's about, the voice commands and the touch screens and something, all different interfaces. That's my interpretation. I hope it's right.
Yeah, I think if we look at it from that vantage point, yes, I mean, you want to make things as easy as possible, and that means consistent. So if you're offering, like you said, voice, touch, and then digital and mechanical sort of interface, then you're already making it very complicated. And when you're designing a product or designing a brand experience, ultimately simplicity is always the best solution. So whichever solution you think is the correct one, it should be consistent. So then it becomes a very intuitive exercise. So for me, always less is more, and simplicity is always the right solution.
That's great. Simplicity. I like that. Jill, do we have more time for more questions, or are we going to close?
I think we should be closing. And for me, I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank you, Jiayu, Martin, and Rikesh, for the brilliant talk. And thank you for everyone who joined us for today's session. If anyone from from the audience actually has any further questions and would like to connect directly with us, the executive education team and the speakers, please reach out directly using the contact information on the slide. And to explore more key design principles and how to apply practical tools that place the human experience at the center of transport decision-making, please do join us on our upcoming Human-Centered Design for Intelligent Mobility short course led by Jiayu this coming March 29th, 30th, and 31st. You can reach out directly on short courses and via social media at RCI Short Courses on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you all again for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and goodbye.
Thank you, Jo.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.